Randy, he knows a tiny bit about Measure 5 and taxes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy, the question is the interpretation that an individual property has been rezoned has caused many property owners to have their property taxes reassessed. And, as you know, it was an astonishing rate, sometimes double and triple. I'd like to understand how the city and the county are working together so that we're not putting a burden on the property owner, but we're trying to increase the density in the Portland city limits and to increase, affordable housing.
Chair Kafori, members of the board, Randy Wolf, your county assessor. First, I want to acknowledge that Phil's been a great partner with us as we go through this, and the document that he's put together to improve the city's code and the understanding has been very helpful. As to your question specifically, we defer to the Oregon Department of Revenue and state law. As most everyone knows, Measure 50 passed in 1997, which set everyone's assessed value based on the use of the property in 1995. The Constitution is vague, and it says that if the property is rezoned and used consistently with that rezoning, then there's a trigger to have the maximum assessed value recalculated. There's numerous versions of whether you do a full recalculation or a partial recalculation, and then that Constitution was implemented by the legislature in 97 through implementing legislation, ORS, and the ORS specifically, I believe, is 308156. And from that, the Department of Revenue wrote rules. And in those rules, they state that it's not only the zoning code, but if the underlying use of the property changes. And in the example specifically at hand, we're talking about a property, I think that you're referring to, if you used to only be able to have one structure, living unit, and you can now have two living unit structures, which means you can have two it's not the same, but as an example, a duplex. You have two properties. So whether they're attached or detached, we work with Phil's office to determine what was allowed in 1995. So it's not a blanket statement in the city that, all of them are remapped, and it's not a blanket situation where your taxes will go up. It's possible that you can benefit from the remap, and this is an evolving piece of law right now. The Department of Revenue has just issued a 5-piece position paper on it, and that they're going to start having administrative hearings on it. They've provided specific direction to Multnomah County and have shared that with the rest of the state now. So I hope this isn't vague for you, but it is somewhat vague to the point that it is fact-based situational on a property-by-property basis right now. And so that is why we're in the situation we're in.
So, Randy, I'm trying to get some clarification. If the creation of an ADU is interpreted as an improvement, would a garden shed or a fence also meet that standard, which potentially impacting the property taxes?
No.
Okay.
And I'll say what we look to back is, did you increase the financial viability, the return on the investment to the property? Property generally has no higher value if you can do a different kind of a garage or an accessory structure, but primarily with ADUs where they can either be rented out and they increase the financial return to the underlying piece of property.
And the last thing, and this may be the city of Portland, as I was going through this, the new rules that we're voting on today will only allow 75% of the height or the mass of the first house or 800 square feet. That's the change that's going to happen with this?
No, that actually is currently the rules. So the real change in the project was not necessarily focused on ADUs. It was just focused on all types of accessory structures. They changed
the language.
Yeah, the 75% is our current. Well, prior to January 1st, it was even our code for ADUs. I think that the big change back in 1995 was that we did not allow somebody to build a detached ADU. They had to be a basement conversion or something along those lines. So, and that's why there's been several conversations with us because it starts becoming a property by property kind of assessment. But the regulations We currently allow ADUs detached or attached or internal. 75% of the living area of the house is the maximum size of the ADU, or 800 square feet, whatever you hit first. And so the main difference that this allows is it allows a smaller structure that meets these dimensional and height requirements to possibly be in the setback in certain zones, the R5, the R2.5 zones.
So would you say the new policy around having ADUs put on properties that are deemed C or EXD now, as opposed to just the R properties, that's going to be able to let us improve the number of affordable housing in the Portland area? Is that the new change with these new regulations?
It could. The allowing an ADU to be in a associated with a house in say a C zone. The main reason for that was actually it had a lot to do with our system development charges, which is another kind of ongoing conversation. Because in a commercial zone, we don't actually regulate how many dwelling units can be on our property. So if somebody wanted to build if somebody had a house in a commercial zone and they wanted to build a second building for a second unit, it already was allowed, but it couldn't be called an ADU. And then it got charged the system development charges. So we thought if somebody wants to follow those accessory dwelling unit provisions and make something that's smaller than the house and so on, then they would have that opportunity.
Well, I was looking at that and I was like, this is great. This is a great opportunity for properties that are zoned C and EXD, because many of those properties are in District 2 in Portland proper, and I think it has the potential to be able to improve the number of additional housing within the city of Portland. So I thought it was great. So thank you for all the work that you've done on this. This is a huge issue, and I do know that ADUs are really, they're becoming more and more popular. When I looked at the numbers of ADUs, applications, there were over 100, and the majority of those were in District 2. So, we are doing our due diligence in terms of trying to meet the need of the community. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I had just one more question. So it sounds to me, for my clarification, I think, so it sounds to me like these code changes are making more consistency among the building, whatever use it's being used for. Am I correct in that?
They're more consistent based upon the typical kind of zoning elements that you usually do, height and bulk.
Right.
We don't necessarily say if you build a house, we don't necessarily say the living room can be on the second floor, but the kitchen has to be on the first floor. Right. But that was kind of how we were looking at these things. And what was happening oftentimes is if somebody was converting some other kind of accessory structure to an ADU, they suddenly were having to ask for an adjustment, even though the physical element of the structure was not changing at all, just because you suddenly applied a new set of regulations to an existing building that was allowed in its current form but not in its proposed form.
Great. Thank you for looking at this. It doesn't sound like it was easy work, but thank you.
Madam Chair, is there anything in this zoning change that we're looking at that requires any of these additional units to be affordable?
No, actually, generally our zoning code does not create, and we don't have the ability to actually do, I'm drawing a blank on the term.
Inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, inclusionary zoning, yeah. So it's not something that we can really put into our code. We are, there's some other projects that we're working on with our mixed use project and so on, where we're potentially giving bonuses for floor area and so on if the units are affordable.
But you're not allowed.
We're not allowed to force somebody to make it affordable. The experience with ADUs have been that oftentimes they are rented at a lower than market rate. Sometimes they're just provided for family members and things like that. So they're not they're not always put on the market. They're oftentimes with an ADU, they're often used for children that come back after college that are still looking for jobs, or people aging in place, things like that.
Do you have any data on that? I'm curious. I've heard anecdotally this same statement that they're rented at lower than market value, but do we have data on how each
The most,
ADU is?
The most recent data, it was something that a couple members from the city participated in, but it was actually a report from DEQ that came out, I think it was up through 2011 data. But there is a report that's available, and what they did is they surveyed people who had constructed ADUs and just kind of asked them, what's your rent range? Do you rent them to certain folks? Things like that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, we have one public testimony.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Lightning?